This video is sponsored by TigerStream, and your promo code is in the description.
I think it's safe to say that nobody in their right mind wants to view themselves as a criminal. But that's what everybody on the face of this planet who lives under some form of government is. Enjoy and share the video.
There is a large collection of terminology that grows out of the concept of authority. What all such terms have in common is that they imply a certain legitimacy to one group of people forcefully controlling another group. Here are just a few examples. The term government. As mentioned before, government is simply the term for the organization or group of people imagined to possess the right to rule. Many other terms describing parts of government, such as president, congressman, judge, and legislature, reinforce the supposed legitimacy of the ruling class. The term law and legislation have very different connotations from the word command. The difference again depends upon whether the ones issuing and imposing such laws are imagined to have the right to do so. If a street gang issues commands to everyone in its neighborhood, no one calls such commands laws. But if government issues commands through the legislative process, nearly everyone calls them laws. In truth, every authoritarian law is a command backed by the threat of retaliation against those who don't comply with that law. Whether it's a law against committing murder or against building a deck without a building permit, it is neither a suggestion nor a request, but a command. A command backed by the threat of violence, whether in the form of forced confiscation of property, like fines, or the kidnapping of a human being, like imprisonment. What might be called extortion, if done by the average citizen, is called taxation when done by people who are imagined to have the right to rule. What would normally be seen as harassment, assault, kidnapping, and other offenses are seen as regulation and law enforcement when carried out by those claiming to represent authority. Of course, using the term law to describe the inherent properties of the universe, such as the laws of physics and mathematics, has nothing to do with the concept of authority. Furthermore, there's another concept called natural law, which is very different from statutory law or legislation. The concept of natural law is that there are standards of right and wrong intrinsic to humanity that do not depend upon any human authority, and that in fact supersede all human authority. Though that concept was the topic of many discussions in the not-so-distant past, it's rare to hear Americans using the term law in such a context today, and that concept is not what is meant by law in this video series. Now, what about the term crime? The flip side of the concept law is the concept of crime, the act of disobeying the law. The phrase committing a crime obviously has a negative connotation. The notion that breaking the law is morally wrong implies that the command being disobeyed is inherently legitimate, based solely upon who gave the command. If a street gang tells a store owner, "You give us half your profits or we hurt you," absolutely no one would consider the store owner a criminal if he resisted such extortion. But if the same demand is made by those wearing the label of government, with the demand being called law and taxes, then that very same store owner would be viewed by almost everyone as a criminal if he refused to comply. The terms crime and criminal do not by themselves even hint at what law is being disobeyed. It's considered a crime to slowly drive through a red light at an empty intersection, and it's a crime to murder one's neighbors. 100 years ago, it was a crime to teach a slave to read. In 1940s Germany, it was a crime to hide Jews from the SS. In Pennsylvania, it's a crime to sleep in or on top of a refrigerator outside. Literally committing a crime means disobeying the commands of politicians, and a criminal is anyone who does so. Again, such terms have an obvious negative connotation. Most people do not want to be called a criminal, and they mean it as an insult if they call someone else a criminal. Again, this implies that the authority issuing and enforcing the laws has the right to do so. How about the term lawmakers? There's a strange paradox involved in the concept of lawmakers, in that they're perceived to have the right to give commands, impose taxes, regulate behavior, and otherwise coercively control people, but only if they do so via the magical legislative process. The people in government legislatures are seen as having the right to rule, but only if they exert their supposed authority by way of certain accepted political rituals. When they do, lawmakers are imagined to have the right to give commands and hire people to enforce them in situations where normal individuals would have no such right. To put it another way, the general public honestly imagines that morality is different for lawmakers than it is for everyone else. Demanding money under threat of violence is immoral theft when most people do it, but is seen as taxation when politicians do it. Bossing people around and forcibly controlling their actions is seen as harassment, intimidation, and assault when most people do it, but is seen as regulation and law enforcement when politicians do it. They're called lawmakers rather than threat makers, because their commands, if done via certain legislative procedures, are seen as inherently legitimate. In other words, they are seen as authority, and obedience to their legislative commands is seen as a moral imperative. Let's look at the term law enforcement. One of the most common examples of authority which many people see on a daily basis are the people who wear the label of police or law enforcement. The behavior of law enforcers and the way they are regarded and treated by others shows quite plainly that they are viewed not simply as people, but as representatives of authority to which very different standards of morality are believed to apply. Suppose, for example, someone was driving down the street not knowing that one of his brake lights had burned out. If the average citizen forced the driver to stop and then demanded a large sum of money from him, the driver would be outraged. It would be viewed as extortion, harassment, and possibly assault and kidnapping. But when one claiming to act on behalf of government does the exact same thing by flashing his lights and chasing the person down if he doesn't stop, and then issuing a ticket, such actions are viewed by most as being perfectly legitimate. In a very real sense, the people who wear badges and uniforms are not viewed as mere people by everyone else. They're viewed as the arm of an abstract thing called authority. As a result, the properness of police officer behavior and the righteousness of their actions are measured by a far different standard than is the behavior of everyone else. They are judged by how well they enforce the law, rather than by whether their individual actions conform to the normal standards of right and wrong that apply to everyone else. The difference is voiced by the law enforcers themselves, who often defend their actions by saying things like, "I don't make the law, I just enforce it." Clearly, they expect to be judged only by how faithfully they carry out the will of the lawmakers, rather than by whether they behave like civilized, rational human beings. And how about the terms country or nation? The concept of law and crime are obvious offshoots of the concepts of government and authority. But many other words in the English language are either changed by the belief in authority or exist entirely because of that belief. A country or nation, for example, is a purely political concept. The line around a country is, by definition, the line defining the area over which one particular authority claims the right to rule, which distinguishes that location from the areas over which other authorities claim the right to rule. Geographical locations are, of course, very real, but the term country does not refer only to a place. It always refers to a political jurisdiction, another term stemming from the belief in authority. When people speak of loving their country, they are rarely capable of even defining what that means. But ultimately, the only thing the word country can mean is not the place or the people or any abstract principle or concept, but merely the turf a certain gang claims the right to rule. In light of that fact, the concept of loving one's country is a rather strange idea. It expresses little more than a psychological attachment to the other subjects who are controlled by the same ruling class. which is not at all what most people envision when they feel national loyalty and patriotism. People may feel love for a certain culture or a certain location and the people who live there, or to some philosophical idea and mistake that for love of country, but ultimately, a country is simply the area that a particular government claims the right to rule. That is what defines the borders, and it is those borders which define the country. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe and notification button and you'll be alerted when I upload new content. YouTube demonetizes my videos, so I'm fan funded. If you want to support the work I do here, there's a PayPal and Patreon link below. Today's featured shirt of the day is McDeath's. Eat fast, die young. I can't tell you how many great conversations and cool people I've met because of this shirt. It definitely gets a bunch of double takes. I'll see you guys in the next video.